Hey everyone, Happy New Year, and we want to say Happy New Year and welcome to the very first Radiotopia Presents of 2024. It's a series that we are truly excited about. It's called Shocking, Heartbreaking, Transformative. Now, this is from documentarian Jess Shane, who put out an open call on Craigslist and then worked with 4 strangers to explore the standard rules that documentarians and journalists use to tell their subject stories. So the series gets into all sorts of questions about what happens when people's real lives are collected, edited, and consumed. The show pulls back the curtain on what goes on behind the scenes of your favorite nonfiction shows. And then it turns in on itself and some really interesting twists and turns along the way in the making of the show. I've gotten to know Jess a little bit over the making of this show. Every time I chat with her, there's a new wrinkle to this story. It is really incredible. So go check out the new Radiotopia Presents series, Shocking, Heartbreaking, Transformative. It is out now on your favorite podcast platform. Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avergan. This day, August 1st, 1916, actually July 30th, 1916, explosions rock New York Harbor, killing 4 people and destroying some $20 million worth of military goods. This was one of the largest non-nuclear explosions in U.S. history. We will get into the destruction and devastation, including the damage to the Statue of Liberty, which is right nearby. And of course, we will talk about the reasons for this explosion. But first, before we continue, a shout out to listener Seth, who recommended that we talk about this incident, what is known as the Black Tom explosion. So thank you, Seth, for putting this on our radar. Thank you to all of our listeners who suggest stuff. We love that. But here to talk about the Black Tom explosion are, as always, Nicole Hemmer of Columbia and Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Hello, Jody.
Hey there.
So, Niki, to paint the scene here, on the night of this explosion, Black Tom Island is this small island that's part of a larger complex of islands and piers and so forth in New York Harbor. It's actually a little over closer to the New Jersey side. It's near the Statue of Liberty. There's lots of shipping and cargo and industry. There are freight cars, barges, freighters. A lot of them are packed with explosives. The reports are up to 4 million pounds of explosives. One barge that is moored against the pier has 100,000 pounds of dynamite and detonating fuses on it. So, pray tell, why are there so many explosives on boats tied up against the pier just south of Manhattan?
It does seem like a terrible idea.
Okay.
Look, it's happening because there's a war going on in Europe, and though the United States is officially not part of this war, they are selling all of these materials to who would become the allies that they join up with, so to Britain in particular. So they're stockpiling all of these munitions in order to sell to the combatants in World War I.
So it's like, New York Harbor, a major industrial port, and at any given time, the industry can be a particular thing, and at this moment, the thing we happen to be selling is lots of explosives.
Munitions, yep.
Okay, so now we've set the stage. Kellie, you want to pick it up and sort of talk through what happens on this night?
All of this really starts with one man, a man by the name of Captain Franz von Richtelen, who's a German naval intelligence officer, and he's a master spy. And he pretty much arrives to the United States in April of 1915 under the guise of a Swiss passport. He speaks fluent English, and he's able to sort of pose as a businessman in an attempt to buy up as much black powder as he possibly could, hoping to create this shortage and also this explosion that will halt the United States from bringing any more ammunition into Europe. So, I mean, it's a pretty well thought out plan. It's a pretty simple plan if your plan is just to sabotage ships and sabotage ammunition, but it goes off without a hitch.
And the U.S. is lousy with German spies at this point, I think pretty much unbeknownst to most Americans, including the government. And even before the Black Tom explosion, there are all of these weird fires that are happening on boats and piers. And, nowadays we know that it was most likely von Richtelen and all these other spies who are trying to sabotage the U.S. munitions industry because those are weapons that are going to be used against the Germans.
Yeah, I mean, you read about all these fires. It's funny, when I read about the sort of spate of fires in 1915 and 1916 and fires aboard ships and so forth, my mind didn't immediately go to, oh, this must have been other sabotage. I mean, I just also feel like just fire prevention was like not as sophisticated and just like, fire.
No one's thinking terrorism.
Fire was like the greatest sort of threat. And then obviously you have all these explosives. But yes, what we are painting a picture of here is a sort of growing spy network and infiltration in the U.S. And so I guess one question is, von Rintelen, is he and the other officers, I mean, this is, official German intelligence as far as we know. This is German state infiltration into the United States.
It is, and that's why it's interesting to me that this is sometimes referred to as terrorism, because this seems like pretty straightforward warmongering, right? Like these are acts of war by a belligerent power, because they're doing what belligerents do during a war, right? They're trying to keep the other side from amassing all of these munitions.
And they're reporting directly to Berlin. So it's a straight line here. There's not too many other players involved. It's clear what Germany is trying to do and how they're trying to undermine any U.S. contributions to the war efforts.
Yeah, the German ambassador to the U.S. is part of this. So it is right from the top.
Yeah.
So I suppose a lot of what's really interesting here is the reaction to this and the sort of aftermath. But let's do a moment on the explosion itself. I mean, this is a massive explosion. One remarkable fact is it was felt as far away as Philadelphia, 90 miles away. Window panes in Times Square were shattered. The stained glass window in St. Patrick's Cathedral were destroyed. I don't think there was sophisticated measurements at that point, but the estimation is it was basically a 5.5 on the Richter scale earthquake in the New York area caused by this explosion.
This is no small explosion.
This is no minor rubbish fire.
No, it can be felt everywhere, all throughout the tri-state area. And it's happening at 2:40 in the morning, so people are not preparing for this. It's not as though it happened during the daytime or even during an evening when people would still be awake. So you can imagine if you're sleeping through this, it's terrifying to hear this explosion going off and not know what's going on.
It probably saves lives that there aren't people, getting hit by glass, that there aren't more people on the island.
Yeah.
It's probably a good thing it happened at night.
One other tidbit there. When the World Trade Centers collapsed and the North Tower collapsed in 2001 after the attack on 9/11, that registered a 2.3 on the Richter scale. Black Tom was a 5.5, and the Richter scale is logarithmic, so 5.5 is way, way bigger than 2.3. So that's a picture of how powerful this was. We hinted at it a little bit, this kind of assessing this as an act of terrorism, assessing this as an accident. It does seem like President Wilson and just in general, the official U.S. response, I don't know if poo-pooing it is the right thing, but there's sort of a not understanding exactly what was going on seems to really be the case. And sort of Wilson calls it, just sort of a regrettable incident at a private railroad terminal. He does not seem to understand the geopolitical implications here or the stakes here.
Well, this is because for a lot of different reasons, the United States doesn't really have an established national intelligence service. So what we think of in terms of like the FBI or the CIA or all of these agencies that come much later just aren't in existence then. So he would not have had the intelligence to exactly know at that moment, oh my gosh, this was the Germans. So he really kind of plays it down and makes it seem like this was an accident as opposed to something intentional. And I think part of that too is because he doesn't want to be an alarmist and have people freaking out that this might happen again or this might happen elsewhere.
Yeah, and he also doesn't want to go to war at that point. He's in the middle of a presidential re-election campaign in which both sides are like, we're going to be the ones that keep you out of war. And he's running on the idea that he's kept the United States out of war. So even if he suspects that this is German involvement, he has a lot of political interest in not believing that.
It's clear that prior to this explosion, there is not necessarily the national intelligence playbook or motivations to really see this for what it was. The other part of this is very quickly, they write the playbook that still is being used today, right? Because we see basically in the wake of this, and I think in many ways, we can look at this incident as a sort of one of the kickoffs to the rise of the national intelligence industry in this country, or complex in this country. But Congress immediately passes the Espionage Act, which, outlaws crimes associated with German agents. Then they pass the Sabotage Act. Funding for national security infrastructure and investigations goes through the roof. I will also point out that President Roosevelt uses this explosion as part of his rationale for the internment of Japanese Americans many, many years later in 1941. But, again, I think we see how an incident like this, we see this playbook. An act of terrorism or an act of sabotage gets used as an excuse for all sorts of behavior, even a generation or two later. So it's like there wasn't a playbook, and then there was a playbook.
What to me is so remarkable about this moment is that Germany pays up. That not only do they identify who the culprit is, but in 1953, they settle on $95 million, interest included, for the Republic of Germany to pay back the United States damages. The final payments made in 1979. But to me, this is an aspect of the history that I think is rarely discussed, is the fact that Germany not only was held responsible, but accountable, had to actually compensate the United States in damages.
They only pay up after they lost 2 world wars, I will point out.
Small tidbit.
But yes.
But also interesting to think about in terms of how contentious reparations were in the aftermath of World War I, that there would still be a push to pay the United States back after World War II, is pretty interesting.
Mm-hmm.
What is your sense? I mean, am I out over my skis here when I sort of say this might be a kickoff to the rise of national intelligence? I mean, I just look at this incident 10 years later. Hoover is now FBI director. Obviously, over the course of his tenure, basically the entire intelligence apparatus shifts from reacting to events to trying to anticipate and profile and engage in espionage in order to prevent events.
Mm-hmm. No, I think this is a big moment because the United States realizes that it's vulnerable, that it can't sort of be caught sleeping at the wheel. I think there's always been this idea that because we have the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean sort of buffering us from the rest of the world, that we are not as vulnerable to these sort of attacks. And that's just not true. And it was shown so clearly in that moment that from then on, the United States really steps up its game in terms of espionage and in terms of its relationships with Europe, and how it really sees all of the rest of the world as a potential threat to its autonomy.
Although we should add in one other major explosion in New York, and that is the Wall Street bombing in 1920, because that instance of, it was suspected that it was foreign anarchists who had set the explosion. It was deadly. It was, at the time, then the largest terror attack in U.S. history. And so I think that you put those two things together, and the creation of what would become the Federal Bureau of Investigation is, if not inevitable, is really overdetermined.
So as we wrap up, I mean, look, Black Tom Island, we said it's in New York Harbor, right near Statue of Liberty. You can, I guess, sort of visit Black Tom Island today if you wanted to, right?
Yeah, you can. So they had these landfill projects that later makes Black Tom Island a part of the mainland. So it gets incorporated into Liberty State Park. And you can actually go there where there's a plaque that marks the spot of the explosion. So if you're thinking about doing a field trip in New York City, this might be a cool esoteric thing to do.
And always read the plaque if you go.
Always read the plaque, exactly. Shout out to 99% Invisible there. I have been going out to Liberty State Park. It's just great, and that's the way you get, obviously, the best view of the Statue of Liberty, and there's kayaking off of there, which I've been doing, which is very fun. But I am now realizing that the place that I've been standing and looking at the Statue of Liberty, where you get your best view, is on the southern edge of Liberty State Park, and that is Black Tom Island. I just didn't stop and read the plaque. So next time I will do that. But you can walk there now to that island. All right. Well, that brings us to the end of the episode. Nicole Hemmer, thanks to you as always.
Thank you, Jody.
And Kellie Carter Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
This Day in Esoteric Political History is a proud member of Radiotopia from PRX, a network of independent, listener-supported, artist-owned podcasts. Our researcher and producer is Jacob Feldman. Our producer is Brittany Brown. You can get in touch with us with any questions or comments or ideas for the show. Email us thisdaypod@gmail.com, or you can find a form at thisdaypod.com. My name is Jody Avirgan. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you soon.
Radiotopia.